Hi, I'm Belle Owen, and this is the Purple Orange podcast. Today, we're chatting with Jasmin, who is the founder of a Babes with Mobility Aids Instagram platform. Jasmin, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Jasmin. I'm a disabled creator here in Adelaide, South Australia. And yeah, I run with Babes with Mobility Aids, which is a nice sort of platform where we elevate disabled voices. I post a little bit about my own experience as a disabled person. And yeah.
I was so excited that there was a creator that was based in Gunnerland, Adelaide, that was doing something like this. So yeah, I was just really excited to see it. But I'm interested to hear, I guess, what motivated you to start it in the first place?
Yeah, I think I, had never really been around other disabled people. At the time that I created it, I was in uni, finishing off my speech pathology degree, and I just felt a little bit disconnected from the community. I'd only sort of recently been diagnosed with the conditions that I have, and so it was a bit of a learning curve, learning what my identity looks like as a disabled person, learning about my conditions specifically, because they were both things I'd never even heard of prior to being diagnosed. So yeah, I created the page, and it really just started as this way to meet other people and also like learn from other people's stories and experiences. So it really started with just sharing other creators' stories, which is really cool. And then it's kind of just evolved into, a bit of a mix of still elevating other people's voices, and as well as, sharing my own experiences. And I think now that I feel more confident in my own identity, I feel more confident sharing those experiences. Yeah.
That's so cool. You said that it was uni and you'd recently gotten your diagnosis. So does that mean that you were sort of starting to use mobility aids at that time? Was it kind of a bit part of your journey with becoming a mobility aid user?
Yeah, pretty much. So prior to my diagnosis, I'd had symptoms for a very long time, but I had never sort of been affirmed that there was a physiological cause behind it. And so mobility aids just weren't even really in the cards, because I was told that it was all in my head. So why would you need to use something physical to deal with that? But once I was diagnosed, then I really realized that no, there is a physiological cause behind this, and that I can use these aids to help me get around. But it was definitely a big learning curve in terms of, learning what mobility aids look like, what is good for me, what doesn't work for me. That was all quite a big challenge at the start. But yeah, no, my mobility aids have changed how I access the community, how I access work and uni at the time. They've been really, really helpful in my journey.
Very cool. And so, I mean, I was not a mobility aid user for my whole life, but I did start using like a power wheelchair when I was 10. So it was like pretty early on.
Yeah.
But I didn't even really I needed it because I couldn't keep up with classmates, and in order to do things that required distance, like I tried riding a bike, that was not great, like we sort of tried these different things in my childhood of what might work, what might address the barriers, and it just kind of came to be that a power wheelchair was the best option.
Yeah.
Having short arms means that a manual wheelchair is not really the easiest or the best option for me. So, so I started using it when I was 10, and that was still at a different time in my like identity journey. And I feel like, this was it's pre-social media days as well. And so, a lot of my journey into using a mobility aid was like other students being like, oh, can I like get a ride on the back, or like, and like, even though now it's like really cringe when people say it, like at the time, people asking stuff like that kind of normalizes it, and it feels like it's not something that's like, of like like there's a lot of shame around using mobility aids. And so, so I think it's like, now in the social media age, seeing somebody kind of like taking that platform and, I don't know, sharing that mobility aid pride to the world is something that really resonates with me. So I think that's really cool.
Thank you.
So in terms of in terms of your mobility aid and my mobility aid, so I know from following you on social that your wheelchair has a name.
Yes. So this is Wilgina George. I don't know. I don't even really remember how I came up with it, but I had to top my walker's name, which was Frank Walker from National Tiles. So, you know, like I had to find something that was even better than that, which was a tough ask. But no, well, Gina has stuck, and I really like that. And then I also have a power assist that kind of goes on the back when I need a bit of a boost, and that's called Gretchen Wheelers. So we've kept with the Mean Girls theme. I like to name things like funnily enough, my current car doesn't have a name, but my old car was a red Volkswagen Golf, and I called it Toot Toot, like Toot Toot Chugga Chugga Big Red Car. So I like to name inanimate objects. That's kind of a bit of a thing. So I thought, well, I have to come up with something for this because this is like, you know, my lifeline.
It got me thinking because for my first wheelchair, it was named Boris. It was just like, it was very like square, like it didn't have a lot of rounded edges. You know, the branding was really like, I don't know, Boris just suited it. It was not named after anyone. We just called it Boris. And then like I had Boris for so long, like way longer than you should have a wheelchair, because you know, it's not like buying a new pair of shoes, right? It is getting a new wheelchair is a whole thing. So I put it off for a really long time, and then I haven't named any of my wheelchairs since Boris. Yeah, so I've had two. Like I had one before this one. That was the one that I went to Canada with, and when I got back, it needed replacing because of snow. So now I have this guy that I've had for a while, but I was like thinking of Wheel Gina George. What is the like black sort of like me equivalent? And then I was like, maybe it's Janice Whelan.
Love that. So good. We can have like, we're like in the same wheelchair family. I'm so glad that I've inspired you. I feel like it just makes it even more fun, you know, having a name for something that you're around all the time.
Yeah.
Makes it more fun than just calling it a wheelchair.
When I watch Mean Girls at the weekend and in preparation for this, obviously, they actually have characters that are recurring characters. They're not main characters, but there's a short-statured woman, there's a wheelchair user, and I was sort of thinking about representation in media of mobility aids. It kind of was full circle for me, and thinking that, you know, your platform is also bringing representation to mobility aid users. Is there any other, and I'm putting you on the spot a bit, is there any other media that you're like, love this, this is the representation we like, what we need to see?
Ooh, that's a really good question. I'm not sure. I mean, I think it's still kind of emerging, and I'm honestly shocked. Like looking back, I haven't watched Mean Girls in a while, but looking back, that's like really good representation for the time that it was in. That's really, really cool. But yeah, no, as of late, you know, obviously Chloe Hayden in Heartbreak High is a great disability rep. There's a character in Sex Education that is a full-time wheelchair user, which I think is really, really cool. And he's got like, you know, a main role. And I do love that he is not just the wheelchair user. He has like a whole story and a whole identity outside of that. I feel like representation can be incredibly tokenistic, particularly in that kind of media space. You know, it's like, oh, let's just add a wheelchair user to make it seem more diverse, but not actually fleshing out that character past the fact that they use a wheelchair and they're disabled. So, yeah, that sort of representation is emerging, but I can't think of anything off the top of my head that's got like amazing.
Yeah, representation and struggle too. But I agree, the sex education storyline, the storyline is not necessarily centered around the disability, around acquiring the disability or disability as a tragedy. He has a romance storyline.
Yeah.
But it also addresses disability. Like they discuss his disability in the romance storyline. Like it's not minimized either. Like it's discussed in a really nuanced and realistic way. So yeah, that was one that did come to mind for me as well.
Yeah, I love that, you know, they represented the sexuality and the romance of like, you know, a disabled person, because I think a lot of the time people for some reason have this misconception that we are, you know, not sexual beings or not romantic beings, and that we don't have relationships and fall in love and stuff like that, which we all know, like as disabled people, that that's very much not true, but it's not necessarily something you see represented or talked about a lot. So yeah, I thought that was a really cool like way to represent the disability community. I felt like they did that really well.
Yeah, me too. And I also think it's a sign that our representation in media is not all the way there yet. That when I do see a character come in, you kind of brace. Am I going to hear slurs? Am I going to see that tokenistic representation? Like,
Yeah.
even now, shows that I watch and would trust to handle issues normally, like regularly with sensitivity, when disability comes into it, I'm still like, oh, I don't know. I'm a bit nervous. So I was relieved to see that, but I feel like I almost can't watch things that has disability representation relaxed, as you're like, oh, how's this gonna go?
Yeah.
Like even Mean Girls has some slurs in it. I so yeah, they drop the R slur, like, and you're like,
Yeah, like why would you do that? But it's a representation of the time.
yes, absolutely. And so, if it came out today, yeah, it just goes to show like that we still have such a long way to go for, I think, representation for disability in the media.
Absolutely, massively. I think, using disabled actors to play disabled characters is also something that, I think needs to continue to be developed. Like, we just don't see, if someone is playing, even, like someone like Eddie Redmayne playing Stephen Hawking. Yeah. I think like that could have been incredible, like played by an actual disabled person. It's things like that, like, that true representation and giving disabled people, jobs and keeping them employed in that space. I think it would be, much better if we used more disabled actors for disabled roles. It was really cool seeing what's her name?
Melissa Boat, is that?
I'm thinking of so the Wicked movies. Yes, yeah. It was really cool seeing that and seeing a wheelchair user actually play a wheelchair user in a film. I feel like that was really, really cool.
Yeah, and that's another story so part 2 of Wicked hasn't come out yet, so somewhat spoiler alert, but there's stuff in the story, in the Broadway story, that kind of plays into that trope of, disability needs to be cured. The first thing a wheelchair user would do is wish away their disability, and like that might be true for some people, and and absolutely no shade to them, but it does perpetuate that that myth of disability or people with disability as not a whole person, or missing something. And so
Yeah.
yeah, I was really nervous that we would also see that. Like, finally, we have this representation of an actual wheelchair user playing Nessa Rose, but then, are we gonna still have this? And apparently, no. Apparently, it's changed.
That's good. I'm pleased to hear that.
And they're still like keeping to the original story.
Yeah.
But in a way that kind of has a little more respect for the disability element of it all.
Oftentimes, like disability in general is framed as a tragedy, and we're pitied for having a tragic existence, but that's not necessarily the case. I think that most, if not all, disabled people have joy in their lives, have things that they love, interests, and I think it's important to represent that and to not fall into that like tragedy kind of trope that a lot of people seem to think is the way to go.
Yeah. I think that's something that I really also love about your platform, about Babes with Mobility Aids, is that it is first and foremost an aesthetic platform, right? So like Instagram requires things to be cute and be on brand, and that's not always the first thing that people would think of when they think of wheelchairs and walkers and crutches and things. And so I really love the way that you bring your own style and like flair into the design of the posts. Is that like a decision that you made, or?
Yeah, well, I think like something that I think about a lot in particular the mobility aid space is how mobility aids look incredibly clinical all of the time. We customize them to make them feel a bit more us, but that's only sort of a more recent kind of development. I think previously mobility aids were kind of just as is, and there wasn't as much customization around like making it feel more you. But now that we're celebrating mobility use more than shaming it, I think that using colorful stuff and aesthetics, like aesthetics and like mobility slash disability aids don't tend to mix all that much, particularly, you know, before customization and things like that. So I think it's important to, yeah, bring the aesthetics into it, bring a bit of fun into it. You know, I wear a lot of color, not really showing that off today. Yeah, my wheels are kind of fun, and my dad just did this like vinyl wrap on my chair that's all pink and cute. Terrible. But yeah, like I think it's important again to show that, you know, disability is not this clinical tragedy, clinical tragic existence that, you know, isn't vibrant and full of life and full of color and stuff. So it is definitely a conscious choice for sure. But it's also just that I like color and I want things to look pretty on the feed, and I like the way that it all has kind of come together at the moment. I kind of changed the vibes a little bit, and I think it's working well.
And that's also true, I think, you know, I mean, like, wheelchairs aren't shoes, and I get that, but like, people choose shoes to complement their outfits. It's part of, you know,
Yeah.
like all accessories, I guess, are something that people want to have a cohesive look, and you know, it's the way that you choose to present yourself to the world is the way that you're perceived so often. So
Yeah,
I think
absolutely.
that, you know, what you've done with your colorful spokes, and you've got your two-tone kink as well.
Yeah, it's so fun. We kind of just went into it not really knowing like what vinyl he had in the shop, and yeah, we managed to find these two cute colors. Most of them were like boring, corporate, ugly logo colors that were just not gonna fly, but these were the two that we found, and yeah, that's so cute. They're so fun.
Sort of changing lanes a little bit, but like, I think in the vein of using your platform to sort of educate people about mobility aids, and something that, you know, we do through our work at Purple Orange, or I do as a disability advocate, is, you know, we talk about mobility aids a lot, and there's sort of there's multiple schools of thought about it. I guess they don't clash necessarily, but there's different ways of kind of thinking about mobility aids.
Absolutely.
So, sort of one way that I will talk to people about like wheelchairs, my wheelchair in general, is it being a tool. So, you know, I'll sort of explain how it's a tool that enables me to do something that I couldn't have otherwise done. And then this is probably like an outdated analogy, because like almost every can has a ring pull now. But I sort of will say, like, you know, if you have a can without a ring pull and you want to get to what's inside, you can't do it just with just your body. Like, we don't have claws that can open a can, or, you know, okay, maybe we could smash it open on a rock, but it's not, you're not doing what you need to do in an effective way. So what we would do is we would use a tool, the right tool for the job, which is a can opener, to get what we need. And so, you know, that's what a wheelchair is to me. It's using the right tool for the job. I need stability. I need to be able to go long distances, all the reasons that I use a wheelchair. So I kind of talk about it like that. But then I think that's helpful. Like, to some people that's helpful. But then there's the other school of thought that we've kind of touched on, as, you know, that like mobility aids can also be accessories. And so, you know, while it's not an accessory like that is just an optional add-on like a necklace, I'm really interested in that kind of, I think that school of thought, and something that it brings to mind for me is like glasses. So, you know, how glasses, like seeing glasses would, you know, be so stigmatized in the past, and people would be teased for them. But like now people will get clear frame glasses. They don't need glasses, and yet they wear them, you know, as a fashion accessory. And I think about, like, imagine if we kind of did this full 180 pivot. What if mobility aids as an accessory went too far? So, you know, Kylie Jenner did a photo shoot in that golden wheelchair. It might have been like 2016. And there was like a lot of uproar around, you know, it's not a prop. And that is so true. Like, I fully agree, you know, not using it as a prop, and what you had mentioned about, you know, actual disabled people should be if you're shooting a wheelchair, have an actual wheelchair user. But I also think, like, you know, perhaps is there a role to play in that sort of stuff in reducing stigma? I don't know, maybe not, but yeah, it's complex. I think I probably think about mobility aids more than the average, but maybe you do too.
I definitely do, yeah. I think, you know, like, like we were saying about, other kids wanting to hitch a ride and stuff like that when you're younger. Like I love, like I'll let people have a go in my wheelchair and just have a bit of fun with it because I think it normalizes, that experience. Also teaches them more about like what it actually is like to use a wheelchair. I think a lot of people don't realize, particularly in a manual chair, the strength it takes as well and the balance as well. You need to have like not fall over like I did last week. But yeah, I think I like sort of, sharing that experience with people. But I don't know how I feel about like it being an accessory because yes, it is in a sense for sure, and we do like to decorate it in a way that fits with our personality and our aesthetics. But then like if I think about if someone was using it as a prop and a bit of a
Hands kind of got there. Like,
yeah, a little bit.
it was like a status symbol. Maybe not in recent.
No,
But
no,
yeah, I was just mulling it over. But what you said just reminded me of your recent content. So you know what I'm talking about. Do you want to tell me about it?
Sure.
Yeah.
I was bored and I'm assuming we're talking about my wheelie and yeah, okay, cool. So I was bored at work. I had like a 2 hour break in between clients and I went, you know what? I really want to learn how to wheelie spin. So I've only very recently learned how to master a wheelie. I took my anti-tips off and being very brave.
This is just two wheels,
Yeah.
but turning in a circle.
Yeah.
Wheels.
Yeah, pretty much. And so like a couple of my wheelchair user friends can do it really, really well and they post about it all the time and I'm like, oh, I want to be that. I was like, I'm going to practice in my 2 hour break. Like, what could possibly go wrong? And I did 1 360 successfully. And I was like, this is perfect. I'm so good at this. I'm amazing. Got way too cocky. Next one is when I fell over. Fell backwards. And of course, being a little content creator that I am, I was filming, just, film random things I do every now and then for B-roll. And yeah, I was like, you know what? That would make quite a funny video. And I guess 4 million people have seen that now, so that's great.
Honestly, like I was half paying attention to my feed and like just scrolling, and then I just saw like feet in the air. I was like, I'm in.
Oh God, did you see the like foreshadowing one to the sugar on my tongue? Like, how they like do that repetitive trend? I did it to that, and that's the one that went stupidly viral on TikTok. Like,
I love that.
weirdly, in France, like France is like the highest country that it's, I looked at my insights and stuff and yeah, like 15% or something of the views from France.
You're like consuming social media, you're aware of the trends and then you're just applying it to your life as a wheelchair user. Are you seeing things and thinking like, how do I disable that up? Yeah. Do you have a process of like what you jump on?
It's kind of hard. Like sometimes I'll be like, oh yeah, like I've got a million ideas in my head. Like, I could do that. I could do that. I can do that. And then some weeks I'm like, I have absolutely no idea what I want to film this week. So it's definitely a bit of like if there are a lot of trends that are going around that feel like easy and doable from a disability perspective, then I can be like, yeah, that's easy. I'll just pump out a couple of TikTok videos and that'll be good. But sometimes like nothing's coming up that's inspiring me. I spend a lot of time on social media and I think like I did before, really getting into babes, but I think now because I'm like always looking at content and being like, oh, how can I, put a spin on that? How can I make this more disability centered? Now that I've done that, I feel like I'm just always on there, just like, what can I do next? Which is maybe not the best thing, but I do enjoy a cheeky scroll.
Sharing your life on social media and doing advocacy in that way also requires a level of vulnerability, I guess. Is there anything that you do to sustain yourself as like an online disability sort of activist or advocate?
Yeah, I think like I try and listen to my body and take breaks when I need to. Obviously some things are unavoidable if I have like a paid collaboration or something that I have to get done by a certain date. But I try and be kind to my body and, listen to it when I am burnt out a little bit. I think working at the same time as doing the content creation has been a bit of an adjustment. I'm only doing 2 days a week as a speechy at the moment, but doing 2 days a week of that and then having all my all the appointments that you have like outside of work and then, putting filming and stuff on top of that. It also means that I need to look more presentable than I usually do because I'm usually just in PJs and don't wash my hair very often and, So stuff like that, like I think I'm doing my makeup way more than I ever have in my life. But yeah, I think sustaining it is just around like, listening to your body and being kind to yourself when it's just not going to happen that day or that week. Yeah, I think I'm still learning how to do it, but I think a lot of content creators will like film in advance and have stuff that's ready. But I think I am a bit too impatient for that. And I go, I've finished this. Like, I finished this video. It's sitting in my phone. Why don't I just post? So I'm a little bit like that. I'm not very good at planning ahead because I'm just like, well, it's just there. Like, I may as well put it out there now instead of in a week's time, which I'm learning to be a little bit more, I don't know, a bit more measured and controlled with that. Yeah.
Like, while it's important to have realistic conversations in online spaces about the experience of disability, is there anything that you feel like you don't share or you regret sharing?
Hmm. Well, my previous relationship, I pretty much just sort of, and that was more at the request of my partner at the time. But I didn't really talk about them at all, which was fine by me. That doesn't need to be a part of my content if they're not comfortable with it. So I kind of keep that stuff private. I don't share my full name on social media at the moment. I don't know if that'll change, but I guess there's things that I don't necessarily talk about too much, but I find I'm kind of a bit of an open book and I don't tend to shy away from more difficult topics and embarrassing topics just because I don't feel as embarrassed maybe by them as other people would. So like, if I'm having tummy issues, I'm going to tell someone I'm having tummy issues, like I don't really, there's not really a filter there. I think the vulnerability is important, and I think the authenticity is important too. So if I'm, lying on camera and being like, I've had a great week and everything is amazing and whatever, like, there's no point in doing that. Like, I just don't see the point in being, putting this persona of like, everything's amazing and I'm doing great if I'm not. But then it's also important that when I am having a good time, I put that up too, to show that there is what's the word?
I mean, like, non-disabled lives, we see the ups and the downs on social media of people's just life experiences. So I think it's important to the duality of disability, I guess.
Yeah.
Both sides of the coin.
For sure. I think one thing that like I do struggle a little bit with when I am showing disabled joy is people see this as like some inspirational thing. And it's like, no, I'm just existing. Like, this is my existence is not inspirational just because I'm disabled. If I do something inspirational, like go, I don't know, do a marathon or like become a Paralympian or something, then yeah, you can call me inspirational because that's like a big thing and that's not something that the average person does. But if I'm just going and like, working part-time or doing something that, everyone kind of does, I don't want to have that kind of attention. I think it's not helpful and it kind of, again, like reinforces that idea that disability is a tragedy and which is not.
I've had that conversation with people about how do you celebrate disability in a way that is respectful and in a way that honors the disabled experience. So I think what you're talking about, this inspiration porn, it flattens the disability experience of saying like, congratulations to you for going to work 2 days, but it doesn't address the barriers to going to work for 2 days. It doesn't do anything to change a system in which working for 2 days or whatever that thing is might be, difficult or whatever. And so, I think that that's a tricky one. And I usually will kind of, we sort of say like, if someone, who was non-disabled was doing that thing, would you congratulate them? Would you find it inspirational? Like, if yes, then yes, you can be inspired by it. But I think it's, for me in conversations around kind of educating or like bringing people on that journey of, a deeper dive on disability, that's a tricky one where people are like, but I might be inspired by, non-disabled people. So why can't I be inspired by disabled people? And it's like, that's the line for me in the sand of like, we are inspired by a non-disabled person doing it. Then but if not, maybe reflect on that.
Yeah, reflect on how like your, perception of disability is shaping that idea. And I think we do see a lot of representation in the media is all these like, feel good stories, inspiration porn about disabled people, conquering something or doing something. And it's just like, I don't know. I just feel that it reduces us to this kind of infantilizing
Yes.
image.
Have to see like another like this varsity kid asked this like wheelchair girl to prom.
It's just like, really? Yeah, no, I do not enjoy that content at all, and I try to call that out like when I see it, because I think people are meaning well. They're not it's not like a, they're not doing it out of um a like, hatred of disabled people or anything like that, but it's just this subconscious idea that disabled people are tragic and all that, and that's something that we need to call people out on. And it's not an attack, it's just like we all have subconscious biases, and there's things that I'm still learning about communities that I'm not a part of, and I think it's important to then just listen to people that are in those communities, and if they're saying like, hey, maybe don't say that about us, or don't react to us doing this, then
It takes some self-reflection as well. Like that takes, some time to really like unpack why you might have that bias and all of that kind of stuff. So I think, and I have the time and the energy to have a slowly or a gently approach for the most part. Sometimes run out of patience, but I think that, it's a bit of a different thing to ask people to kind of really, reconsider. So yeah. I have another question. What is your dream for Babes?
I think continuing to challenge misconceptions is a really big thing. And maybe get out of the echo chamber of like just disabled, like sort of so a lot of my community and my followers are disabled people. So I'm not necessarily telling something to them that they don't already know. I think my goal is to reach more non-disabled people, and to be able to share those experiences and potentially like advocate and create change in those spaces with people that are non-disabled, because I definitely like I said, it's a bit of an echo chamber in the disability space on social media. We kind of all follow each other, but there's not a huge amount of people that are non-disabled engaging with that content. So I think that's definitely something that I'd really like to achieve with the page, is just more reach into non-disabled spaces. And I think it's important for like brands that aren't just disability specific to be working with disabled creators as well, because that creates more positive representation that is created by us. I think that's really important. I've talked about that before on my page. Like, I welcome working with disability specific brands, but it's also important for brands that are not disability specific to recognize that they still have disabled consumers, and that if they're not marketing to the disability community, they're losing out on a massive percentage of people that could be buying their products. So I think that's something that I feel like I'd like to work with some more brands and create a bit more visibility and positive representation.
What you mentioned about sort of the echo chamber, I think we sort of touched on this before in a past conversation. And I sort of agree. Like, you see that there's sort of two types almost of disability related content, and some of that is like for disabled people and some of it is for non-disabled people. And that's a big question that you need to think about. Like, we think about it when we're creating the podcast, like who is the listener and what do they take from it? What are they learning? That sort of thing. And I think there's a really big place for disability content for disabled people. We need that solidarity within the movement. We need that motivation. Sometimes we need the laugh of somebody trying to do a spin wheelie. But that is something that I also consider, like, how do we broaden and like how do we increase the appetite of people outside of the disability community to consume disability related content? Do you have any learnings there? Do you have any insight on it? Or
it's hard. Like, it's definitely hard to reach that community, because the algorithm will push my content to disabled people. Like that's kind of just, if that's the content they're already engaging with, that's why those are the people that I'm going to get pushed to, right? I think I've been getting some success with it in making posts that are like highly shareable.
Yeah.
So I've found that the most growth kind of happens when I post something that is like a carousel that's informative, but it's like targeted towards people that are non-disabled. So like 10 things you shouldn't say to a disabled person, stuff like that. So disabled people will be the ones sharing it, but it'll be going to people in their lives and in their following that are maybe not necessarily all that familiar with disability and don't engage with that content otherwise. So I think that's been a good way to do it, but it's definitely something I'm continuing to sort of work on. And I think, like I said, sort of using like brands that are non-disability specific is a good way to get that visibility, because people are following those brands that don't have that background. And I think that's a good way to do it, but still very much learning.
What's the, like, we sort of talked about what you want to do, like big picture down the track with Babes, but like what is the immediate future for Babes / Jasmin?
Yeah. Well, at the moment, I signed with a talent agency a couple of months ago, which was a really cool milestone. I think continuing to like maybe make a bit of passive income out of it, which I've started to do a little bit. It'd be nice to be able to increase that, and you know as you know, being a disabled person is expensive, and like not being able to work full time means that I don't have the sort of income that I need to be able to, move out of home and stuff like that. So I think in the short term, I'm looking forward to hopefully working with a few more brands and just getting some more paid opportunities. That's kind of the short term goal at the moment, is just connecting with more people in that way. But I think as well, I got this really sweet message on TikTok last week from a young girl in Broken Hill, and she was just so lovely, and she was really grateful to have found my page. And I think she struggles. She's been disabled since a very young age, and she's always struggled with her identity and finding who she is outside of her disability, because unfortunately that's just what people see and they don't necessarily look deeper for her. And so we've had like lots of conversations over the last week around that, and stuff like that really motivates me to keep going, because it means that my content is resonating with someone that it could actually help, and help them to move through and learn more about their identity as a disabled person and find more joy. And I think that's been really, really valuable, and I hope to keep reaching people like that.
Providing an opportunity for people who, like, disability might be what others perceive as their whole identity, and their life is impacted significantly by their experience of disability because they are going to the appointments that you mentioned, and all the life admin stuff that comes with disability, and the way that it can really take over. And so it is your whole identity, but you're not viewing it from, necessarily not speaking for that person, but you might not be viewing it from a sense of pride or disability culture. And I think like Babes is contributing to that disability culture, where it's not maybe any less of someone's identity, but it is shifting how they feel about the identity.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think there's, a lot to be said about feeling pride about being disabled. It doesn't necessarily mean that you need to be happy with the fact that you are disabled, and you can still grieve what could have been, or what life would have been, what life would have been like if you weren't disabled. Those two things can coexist. You can feel joy and pride about your disabled identity whilst also grieving what you could have if you weren't disabled. So I think that's a really important conversation to have.
Yeah. That actually reminds me of that trend that is happening at the moment, where I have seen like a few people with disability and people who are like considerable like advocates who have a platform using generative AI to imagine themselves as someone without disability. And like I had a really like a complex reaction to it, where I think it's natural to be curious And like at first I was like, ugh, yuck, hate it, but you can't be mad at somebody for having curiosity. And then I was like, would I do that? And I was like, absolutely not. Like I don't have a real drive within me to be like, who am I without this? Because
Yeah.
isn't that person to me that,
Mm.
that just doesn't exist. But I just found it so interesting that people have not just like created it, but shared it. Have you seen that?
No, I haven't. That's a really interesting thing to, and I think it's, important to recognize that, yeah, people are at different sort of stages of their journey with their disabled identity. And some people may always feel that their disability is a negative thing and, wish for a life where they aren't, and that's okay. Like, that's okay if that's how you experience your disability and experience your identity around it. I don't think that that's a negative thing necessarily, but it is, also the reason why positive representation is important, because you need to be able to see these people doing things and living their lives in a positive way, and be able to see that disabled joy in order to be able to sort of experience it in some situations. So yeah, I definitely find like it's okay to feel like that. Like, I don't think that, everyone is always going to be feeling pride and joy about their disability. And I have moments where I'm like, imagine the things I could do without it. But then I have to remind myself that it's not necessarily my disability that's the reason that I can't do those things. It's the barriers.
The disability AI relationship is such an interesting one to me, because as well, like AI is essentially what it learns from, and what it learns from is a deeply ableist society. So it's going to replicate, ableist views, and we've seen that eventuate already. I've known of a person, like a disabled woman who has not a visible disability in the instance that it is relevant to the story. And someone has sort of said, oh, generate an image of this disabled person. And what AI has produced is a woman with a wheelchair.
Yeah.
This person is not a mobility aid user at all. And so but this idea of disability that AI has, a simplified idea, is I'm going to generate a wheelchair user. And so, it doesn't allow for that nuance. And that person was like, this isn't at all a representation of me. Like it would, it's so completely off. And this really made me think about the limits of, I guess, it producing things. There are also plenty of people with disability who are really enthused about AI and what it can bring them, the barriers that it can reduce for them. But I just think about that all the time, where I'm like, well, if it is by nature, the information that gets fed into it and the information that goes into it isn't great, like, what do we do about that?
It does, yeah, definitely shine a light on society's view of disability, and that it has to look a certain way, which is definitely not the case. There are times where I don't use my wheelchair and I don't look disabled. So and those are unfortunately the times. Usually, like, if I get out of my car and I walk around to the back to get my wheelchair and I've got my disability placard on, people are like, who is she? She must be faking because she's walking. It's things like that, like people, and these are the kind of misconceptions that I'm, really working to sort of debunk with the general public, is that, disability doesn't have a look. It doesn't have a stereotypical, it's just not a stereotype. And so, I think, like, we both have very, like, different looks, even, both using wheelchairs. We've both got incredibly different wheelchairs. We've both got incredibly different, like, looks as well. And I think it's really important to show that disability is it's so different for so many different people, and it looks different for so many different people too. And that, you don't have to judge someone based on how they look on the outside, and you can't make a decision about their disability just by looking at someone. And I think people think that they're being helpful by, like, being like, oh, that person doesn't look like they're disabled and they're using the disability parking space, like it's probably their grandma's. How dare they, stuff like that. It's challenging those ideas that, yeah, disability has to look a certain way.
I think that's so important. And if we have increased representation, maybe we'll see more diversity in things like AI because it is also getting better information fed into it. So the outputs are better.
For sure.
Thank you so much for sitting and having a chat with me this morning. I've loved learning more about your Instagram and about you as a person. Where can people find you if they want to follow the page and learn more about you? Where can we find Babes with Mobility Aids?
So Babes with Mobility Aids is the handle. You can find me on TikTok and Instagram. I also have a website that has like a couple of blog posts on it as well. And I also sell a little bit of merch on Etsy too. So if you ever wanted to have a look at that, you're more than welcome to.
Christmas is coming.
It is. But yeah, no, those are kind of the main platforms that I'm on. But yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for chatting with me this morning. And thank you for listening. This is the Purple Orange Podcast, and I'm Belle Owen.
You can get in touch with Purple Orange at 08-8373-8388 or stories@purpleorange.org.au.